Hey people! So we're going to continue on with our story on the Cold War, but I was going to start off with a quick review of the things we should know that we've already learned. So you don't have to write any of this down. This is just review. I know I'll probably do this on Zoom as well, but it's good to kind of just test yourself as you're learning. So 6 questions here. Let's see how many you could get. So you can pause the video here and try to answer them on a piece of paper, and then check your answers. That'd be a great skill to do. Or you can just kind of listen with me and see if anything's coming to your mind. So number one, when did it occur? Think about the timeline of US history. Think about what just happened before the Cold War, and make an educated guess of the dates of when the Cold War started. As you guys know, there was not like a shot fired that started the Cold War, but you should know when it happened. So again, it doesn't have an official start date, but you should know kind of when it's gearing up and when it's starting. So think about what just happened. What's your educated guess? Do you think the Cold War was done in 2 years? Do you think it lasted a long time? Again, you don't have to memorize specific dates, but it's good to know a general understanding. Number two, what are the main countries involved? There are two main countries, two big superpower countries. What are they? Say them out loud. You know what they are. Hint, this is US history, so I guess one of them probably is America. How are those countries different? Could you list off kind of differences between America and that other country? Maybe there's political difference, maybe there's power differences, economic differences. How are those countries different? Number three, why did the Cold War even start? We just finished a big war, if you remember. Why are we starting another thing? Why is the Cold War even happening? Number four, what is America's foreign policy? What's the strategy during the Cold War? What's the name of it, and can you describe it? Number five, what are some policies that Truman enacted? So Truman was our president at the end of World War II. And so he's obviously our president at the beginning of the Cold War. What are some things that he did that match that foreign policy that are totally in response of the Cold War? Do you remember Eisenhower? What did he do? What was his take on foreign policy in the Cold War? And lastly, how is the Cold War affecting people at home? So we know that things are happening abroad, things are happening around the world, but how is it affecting Americans that are in America during the Cold War? So I'm not going to go over all of the answers, but I would really challenge you to do this activity on your own. Check your answers with your previous notes or with what I'm about to say. This is a really good study technique for the AP test. So let's zoom through the review. I'm going to go fast. Here we go. 1947 and 1991. You don't have to write this down. Check your answers. They should already be in your notes. Of course, the two countries involved are America and the Soviet Union. That is communist Russia. Why it started. Both countries are fighting for global power and influence. Both countries have opposing ideologies. America wants democracy and capitalism to grow, and the Soviet Union wants totalitarianism and specifically communism to grow as well. We know that as in previous lectures and in previous assignments that the Cold War is this massive global battle between America and the Soviet Union, and it pops up all throughout the world. And we see communism growing, we see communism shrinking, we see democracy growing, we see democracy shrinking. So that's kind of the battle of the Cold War. America's response to the Cold War, specifically America's response to the spread of communism, is called containment. Remember, to contain or to keep communism where it already is and to stop it from spreading from other countries to other countries. One of the things that Truman did, he named it after himself, is called the Truman Doctrine. Very important to remember this. This is the idea that we will help any country who's in danger of becoming communist, aka containment. We don't want communism to spread, so we want to help out countries who are in threat of becoming communist, aka Turkey and Greece. We're also just making it rain everywhere else. We're giving money to so many countries in the hopes that they will not become communists. We know that Germany is divided. We know that Berlin is divided. And we know that Stalin and other Soviet leaders want to take advantage of that. One of the things they tried to do was lock the people in Berlin in, hoping to, make them so desperate that they turn to communism. But we did the Berlin airlift, and we still helped out our people. Speaking of our people, we've made it official. We've teamed up a defense alliance called NATO. And so this is obviously happening, and the Soviet Union will then respond with the Warsaw Pact. So again, so far in the Cold War, we are practicing containment, and we're doing all these 4 things that you've already learned in previous lectures. Then the Cold War started to heat up. China fell to communism. You remember that story? Containment had failed. There was a lot of pressure. So when Korea was under the threat of communism, we wanted to make sure that we did not fail again. So North Korea is still communist. South Korea is not communist. And that is the result of the Korean War. Now, this Cold War stuff, it's obviously making people panic. It's making people very fearful. If you're wondering why are they scared of things, it's these nuclear weapons that are scaring people. Obviously, there's a lot of Americans that love that we have nuclear weapons. We feel strong and we feel powerful that we're one of the countries that has this weapon. But there still is this fear of if we press the button and another country presses the button, what will happen to our Earth? How many people will die in nuclear warfare? It doesn't maybe help that we have a president who is very open about brinkmanship, the idea that he will use the weapon if he needs to. So he is not the type of president that is going to avoid pressure or aggression or nuclear weapons. Eisenhower, as our president, practices brinkmanship. He will use nuclear weapons if the situation comes to it. All the while, something called the space race has already started. Again, this whole story of the Cold War is who's better, who's stronger, who's more advanced. Is it the United States or is it the Soviet Union? Each country wants to be the best. Each country wants to prove that they have better technology. And each country wants to spy on one another. So, of course, we want to put these satellites orbiting the Earth so that that satellite can take pictures and we can remain on top and we can know what our enemies are doing. You guys remember the unfortunate situation with our U-2 spy plane? Yep, we were flying over the Soviet Union. You remember it got shot down and it reignited the conflict of the Cold War, specifically between Eisenhower and Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union. But instead of focusing on all that scary stuff, Americans really want a distraction. So this is where some things pop up called the American dream. People want to move out into the suburbs. They want to buy a nice little house. They want to invest in fashion. They want to buy the new car. They want to go to the cool diners. They want to listen to Elvis. They don't want to think about their impending doom if a nuclear weapon gets launched. They don't want to think about what our CIA is doing around the world. They don't want to think about war. They thought about World War I, and that was scary. They thought about World War II, and that was really scary. They're over it. They want to distract their mind. So, yes, in the 1950s in America, you might think of images like this, but again, the Cold War is happening all at the same time. So that was a quick review of I hope I kept it quick. That was a quick review of what you should know about the Cold War. Nothing should have been new. You should have already all known that stuff. And I hope you didn't write any of it down because you already wrote it down. So what's to come? So the Cold War obviously lasts a really long time. What's the next chapter in the story? Well, look at the picture on the left. Does anyone know what that might be? This is a president on our right. His name is John F. Kennedy. He's going to be a new president after Eisenhower. He is arm wrestling with Khrushchev, the same leader of the Soviet Union, and they both are sitting on hydrogen bombs, and they are arm wrestling, arm racing, arm wrestling, and they are both threatening to press this button. They are staring at each other. They are sweating. They are nervous. They are anxious. Who's going to press the button? Who's going to launch the missile? What's going to happen? Then, not in this lecture, but I just wanted to let you know the last major issue of the Cold War that we will cover in this class is the Vietnam War as well. So I'm going to dedicate an entire lecture video just to the Vietnam War, but I just wanted to give you a hint that that does overlap into Kennedy's presidency a little bit, but more so in the guy that follows him. So John F. Kennedy is our 35th president. He becomes president right after Eisenhower. This is actually a pretty big victory for him because he was going up against Richard Nixon. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president, so some people thought Nixon was going to win because he already had a lot of executive experience. But John F. Kennedy is this new guy coming in, and he won over the American voters. He is a Democrat, while Eisenhower is a Republican. And he comes with fresh new ideas that was very attractive to a lot of American voters. This is actually a fun fact. I didn't put a slide, I don't think. This is actually the first ever televised debate. And if we had more time, we would watch it. But maybe I'll put it as an extra credit. But it's nothing like the debates that you see today. It's very organized. It's very calm. But it was the first ever televised one. And so this is when the idea of how a person makes you feel might affect how you vote. And so it was interesting before the televised event, people had a support over Nixon. Nixon was leading in the polls of who would win the presidency. And then after the televised debate, it shifted and more people were starting to favor Kennedy. Even though he had less government experience, he was not vice president. They won him over. I think people liked his personality. They liked his responses to the answers. And so it just kind of showed us for the first time. It's the first time we see a president talk on TV. Who do we trust? Who do we think is telling the truth? The way a person talks and what they're saying matters. And so it really did affect this election. So John F. Kennedy wins. He's very young as a president, 43 years old. I know you guys don't think that's young, but that's young for a president. He comes from a very wealthy family. He was very known as being very handsome and charismatic. That's why I think a lot of people shifted their maybe popularity towards him. He was actually our first and only Roman Catholic president. All of our other presidents claimed to be Christian, and he was very open about being Catholic. And he actually got, journalists can pull from anything, but there was people that were saying that, like, this is terrible. We can't have a Catholic as a president. The Pope is going to be too involved. Okay. Believe it or not, that was a real conspiracy flying around, but nope, he was just a Catholic president. And one of the most famous lines from his inauguration speech, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Very famous. You've probably heard that. And that was not his accent. He has a really cool accent. But anyways, that is our new president in the Cold War. You might already know about him. You might already see that he's only president for 2 years because, spoiler alert, he does get assassinated, which is really sad. But let's talk about his military policy in the Cold War because he's completely different than Eisenhower. Isn't this crazy how our entire country can just change based on a person that's our president? I know you haven't experienced that at all in your lifetime, but Kennedy's military policy is called flexible response. Flexible response. It's the buildup of conventional troops and weapons to allow a nation to fight a limited war without using nuclear weapons. So basically, he's going to go back to the way it used to be. He's going to put more money and more support in regular troops, in Navy ships, and artillery. He is going to not build up nuclear weapons. So this is completely different than Eisenhower's massive retaliation or brinkmanship plans. He's not going to threaten to use nuclear weapons. In fact, he's actually going to create a special forces group called the Green Berets, which is an elite branch of the Army. So what you should gather there, again, he's putting more emphasis in the Army, less in nuclear weapons, kind of going back to conventional ways of organizing a military. Now, he is trying to balance two things. He doesn't want nuclear war, but he still wants to be tough on communism. It's not like the Cold War is very intense. People hate communism. They want a president who is going to be firm and strong. And so in his inauguration speech, he did say phrases like, "It's the hour of maximum danger. The US will confront the iron tyranny of communism." He does send a message to people around the world saying, if you are going to be aggressive, we will do something about it. So even though he's not wanting to use nuclear weapons, it doesn't mean he doesn't want to be tough as a leader. Okay, his story really gets heated dealing with Cuba. So Cuba, you'll see why in a second, why Cuba is at all important to us. But Cuba, something is happening. Fidel Castro becomes the leader, and he is a communist leader. He is in Cuba, and he is friends with the Soviet Union. He promises to end poverty, inequality, and dictatorship in Cuba. Now those promises will not occur. But again, remember what you remember about communism and countries, who it's attractive to, who it sounds good to. So this makes sense why Cuba would maybe want to become communist. But Fidel Castro is a very strong influencer. Not like Instagram influencer, but like he is going to take over control, and the people are going to follow. So he took over three American and British oil refineries. So America is getting a little defensive. They're like, what the heck is happening in Cuba? Castro is turning into a dictator. Shocker. Many people started to leave exile and go to America. Okay, why are we talking about Cuba? Look at where Cuba is. Now remember, the Cold War is preventing the spread of communism. We're still practicing containment. John F. Kennedy is not wanting to use nuclear weapons, but he's still practicing containment. And Cuba has now just become communist. And what makes this even scarier for us is how close Cuba is to America. Something that Kennedy initiated. Cuba had been economically dependent on the US, but when Fidel Castro came into the picture, he is trying to nationalize the industries and kick out the Americans. Obviously, we do not want this. So in 1961, one of the first things Kennedy does as a president is he authorized a CIA invasion combined with other anti-Castro Cubans at a site known as Bay of Pigs. However, this was not secret enough. Castro knew exactly where they were going to go. So out of the 1,400 people that we sent to invade into Cuba, 100 were killed and 1,100 were captured. So this was a huge failure on the books for John F. Kennedy becoming a new president. And then this picture gets put on his desk. If you already know the story, you already know what we're looking at, but let me explain it for those who don't know this story. Imagine you are Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. You are in your first year as being president. You have failed miserably in containing communism already. And as you tried to take over Cuba or establish some control, you look like a fool. And Castro looks like the strong one in the Bay of Pigs invasion. Then one of your aides, one of your secretaries, sends you this picture, prints it out, puts it on your table, and says, "This is a picture that one of our satellites took of Cuba." In this picture, we see missiles. We see the buildup of nuclear weapons in Cuba. How does Cuba have all of this? Are they in cahoots with the Soviet Union? Would it be scary to have these nuclear weapons so close to American soil with only seconds to respond? So, you see the missiles in Cuba. I want you to put which one you would have done. So you're the president. You see this picture. Which one of these options would you have done? Number one, do nothing. Ignore the missiles in Cuba. Number two, open direct conversation with Khrushchev, that's the leader of the Soviet Union, and ask him to take the missiles out of Cuba. You know that these missiles are not just randomly Cuban missiles. You know that they come from the Soviet Union. So just ask Khrushchev to take them out of Cuba. Number 3, order a blockade, a ring of ships around Cuba until the missiles are gone. Number 4, send a warning to Castro and Khrushchev. And if dismantling the missile sites is not done in 24 hours, then you will order an airstrike on the sites. Number 5, don't do the warning. Just order an airstrike against the missile sites with no prior warning. Why does this matter? Let me show you one more picture. This is the range of the missiles that Cuba has. So do you see all the different types of missiles and where they could hit? And you know these missiles, right? You know the amount of people that can die, and you know that it's actually a matter of just minutes and seconds, depending on what type of missile they send. Not enough time to gather up a response. So tell me in your notes which one you would have done. Don't write all these down. Goodness, no. Just tell me which one you would have done, because believe it or not, Kennedy was given all of these options. I am not making this up. I've done all the nerdy research of what happened in those discussions. It's a very famous time period. It's called the 13 days. Kennedy was shown this picture, and then 13 days later, he made his decision. That may seem like a long time for you. That may seem like not a long time for you, but it was kept secret just with his cabinet, just with his main secretaries. And for 13 days, he went from, what should I do? And on record, because everything was kept on record, you see what the different advisors, all the advice that they gave him. You see Kennedy respond with saying, well, I'm thinking that one, maybe this one. And he even changed his mind at certain points. But which one would you have done, or which one would you have advised President Kennedy to do? Let me tell you what he did. In 1962, American spy planes discovered that the Soviets were installing nuclear weapons in Cuba. The Kennedy administration viewed this action as intolerable. Kennedy's military advisors had suggested an attack on Cuba. Kennedy decided to blockade Cuba. For 13 days, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. So blockade. What we did was we put ships around Cuba, told them we knew that they had their missiles, and that we were going to surround them with our army, with our navy, until they took the missiles out. Here's the agreement. Kennedy and Khrushchev did reach a deal. The Soviets would withdraw the missiles from Cuba if the U.S. would withdraw missiles from Turkey. I forgot to tell you this. I waited till right now. You know how we were super threatened by seeing missiles so close to us? We actually had missiles so close to them in Turkey, and we never took them out. We also created something called the hotline. This is like, you might see it in some old movies, but it's this red phone that literally is a one-way protected line between the Kremlin and the White House. So again, it's supposed to be like, if this situation ever happens again, hey, did you mean to put missiles out there? Hey, are you about to attack me? Are we about to do nuclear war? It goes from the main place in the Soviet Union to the main place in America. But most importantly, they signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which I have another slide on, so you'll see. The Cuban Missile Crisis softens JFK on the Cold War. He calls for greater cooperation with the Soviets. He sends word to Castro via a journalist that he hoped for a more constructive relationship with Cuba. Long story short, JFK got a little scared because he was the president that got the closest to doing nuclear warfare. So look at this picture. Let's get a lock on this thing. Nuclear war was creeping out. It was almost there. Kennedy almost pressed the button. Khrushchev would have pressed the button. Millions of people would have died. And he was this close to doing it. But one of the biggest things that came out of this was the fact that nobody wants nuclear warfare. We all have these crazy big weapons, but nobody actually really wants to use them. Because once one person uses it, more people use it, and then boom, our world is gone. So the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963 prohibited nuclear weapons tests or other nuclear explosions underwater, in the atmosphere, or in outer space. It allowed underground nuclear tests as long as no radioactive debris falls outside the boundaries of the nation that is conducting the test. And they pledged signatories to work towards complete disarmament and an end to an arms race and an end to the contamination of the environment by radioactive substances. Yes, they finally woke up and realized that these weapons would destroy our Earth. They would. And so we do, starting now in 1963, we start the process of disarmament, of lowering our nuclear weapons. And so still to this day, we're not supposed to have any nuclear weapons ready. You shouldn't be able to press a button and launch a nuclear weapon, which is why our eyes were always on North Korea when they were testing out crazy weapons. Obviously, the United Nations was making sure that that wouldn't continue. Because obviously in 2021, I mean, if we could make this stuff in 1963, imagine what we can make in 2021. So just because we can make a terrible weapon doesn't mean we should always use it. What could it do to the actual entire Earth? There are a lot of protections in place with what kind of weapons people can use. Okay, effects of the Cuban Missile Crisis. People criticized Kennedy for practicing brinkmanship. I thought he was the flexible response guy. So some people think that he could have just talked it out with Khrushchev. They could have figured it out more calmly. Other people were like, hey, yo, why don't you invade Cuba? Kick Castro out. We don't want a communist that close to us. We want regain over Cuba. So basically, people hated Kennedy on both ends, and Castro banned all flights to and from Miami. Okay, why is this story? Overview question. Why is the Cuban Missile Crisis important in our study of the Cold War era? Okay, next conversation. We have to talk about what's actually happening in Berlin. So this is related to what we were just talking about, but it's not happening in Cuba, but this is still under Kennedy's situation. What's happening in Berlin? You know that Germany's divided. You know that Berlin is also divided. Well, here it goes. There was a conflict. Khrushchev doesn't want this half business anymore. Khrushchev wants all the control of Berlin and wants to kick out the United States from entering. The solution, the US will not give up on Berlin, and a wall is created to separate the two sides. So let's watch this quick video of the rise and fall of the Berlin Wall.
In the embers of World War II, a defeated Germany was carved up, occupied by Britain, France, and the United States to the west, and the Soviet Union to the east. Berlin, which lay well within the Eastern Territory, was also divided, the West an island of capitalism engulfed by a communist superbloc. Though many Berliners could still move freely within the city, well, that was until August 13th, 1961. Berliners awoke to a barbed wire fence surrounding the western part of the city, a barrier to contain East Germans hungry for the lifestyles of the West. Overnight, families were split, and East Berliners working in the West were cut off from their jobs. Barbed wire soon became a sprawling concrete colossus, stretching 155 kilometers. Thousands of armed guards kept watch from 302 observation towers. Now, looking out from the east, past the outer wall, is an area known as the Death Zone, where guards will shoot to kill. A signal fence here sends a silent alarm when touched. Next, tank traps before a terrible carpet of metal spikes, nicknamed Stalin's Lawn. Then, the wall as the West saw it, 3.6 meters tall, topped with a half pipe in places to make it scaling it almost impossible. More than 100,000 East Germans attempted to escape past the wall. At least 5,000 succeeded, but more than 200 died trying.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
One of President Kennedy's most rousing speeches was delivered here at the wall, within earshot of the East, a message repeated years later by President Reagan.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In 1989, cracks began to show. Guards were told not to shoot, thousands rallied for freedom in East Berlin. On the 9th of November, a sea change. East Germans would be allowed to cross the border. Thousands headed to the wall. Tearful, jubilant Germans from both sides began to hack and rip down the concrete. Excited, welcoming hands reached over. East Berliners soaked up the strange Western wonderland, sparkling with the things they had so long been denied. In less than a year, the wall was in tatters and the Iron Curtain was being pulled back. Germany, fractured for 4 decades, was united once more. Atika Schubert, CNN.
So the Berlin Wall is another message that the Soviet Union is trying to send of their control and their power. So that's just a quick video that talks about what's happening, the rise and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But right now we're in the 60s. The Berlin Wall just got put up. And so we're going to protect our people that are in West Berlin, but they are surrounded by a communist nation of East Germany and East Berlin as well. Okay, let's end it off with talking about some quick domestic policy stuff. So this is still in the Cold War, obviously. JFK, you learned about his biggest foreign policy situations, but he also is famous for his domestic policy. It's called the New Frontier. It's from his inauguration speech. We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s, a frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, a frontier of unfulfilled hopes and threats. The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises, it's a set of challenges. So here are some economic changes that he planned to do and did do as president. He did support deficient spending, which was similar to Roosevelt and the New Deal. So that means he will go into more debt, but is trying to re-stimulate the economy in other ways. He did try to lower taxes. He increased the minimum wage to $1.25 an hour. Can you believe that? That was an increase back then. That was good. This number is good. It just shows you how crazy money is. He extended unemployment insurance. He provided help for cities with high unemployment. And he established the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which abolished pay differences that were based on sex. So, foreign aid changes. He created something very famous called the Peace Corps. It was a program of volunteers that were helping nations around the world, developing nations, third world nations. A lot of young people love to sign up for this program, a lot of college volunteers. And so basically, I mean, I had a friend that did the Peace Corps just recently. It's still in existence. But you sign up, you pick a job that you think matches your skill set and a skill set that other countries may need. So you can be a teacher in the Peace Corps, be sent to a developing nation, and help them out in any way that you can. So a lot of nurse, health aides, teachers, etc. He also created the Alliance for Progress, which offered economic and technical aid to Latin American countries. Now, keep in mind, these are potentially countries that are in threat of becoming communist, but this is, maybe a positive spin on helping those Latin American countries. So those are foreign aid changes. He's very famous for really, really wanting the race to the moon. He puts a lot of money in the space race. He initiates this, but he's not alive for when the United States does land on the moon. Again, space race with the USSR. Domestic changes. JFK focuses on the national assault on the causes of poverty, aka the war on poverty. This will be something we talk about more later with other presidents, specifically the next one to come. But JFK did start this, and he was pushing on for a very important civil rights bill. He had certain ideas that were in the process, but he gets assassinated right before those turn into a reality. Let's watch this quick video on JFK on civil rights.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
John F. Kennedy is not the perfect president, but he was saying some things and planning some certain actions that seemed like he was going to push for equal rights. He was going to get rid of segregation that was still happening in southern states. It looked like he was going to make voting discrimination go away. There was all these plans in place. So it's always curious what would have happened if he wasn't assassinated. But again, we'll talk about that. What does happen for civil rights later. But this was his take on the civil rights movement. But again, not perfect. Obviously, leaders of the civil rights movement called him too safe or too slow. But when you compare him to maybe other presidents before him or after him, he did look like a more progressive president. JFK is unfortunately assassinated November 22nd, 1963. He was shot when he was traveling Texas. There was a 10-month investigation by the Warren Commission to see if there was any conspiracies around this. I know some of you love conspiracy theories, wondering if the White House was involved, other people in government were involved. But they did find that this guy acted alone in shooting Kennedy. But yeah. And then Jack Ruby also acted alone when he was killed Oswald before he could stand trial. So there was a lot of sketchy stuff that happened. And I know there's people out there that are super into this. Maybe I'll make it an extra credit. But the idea here is obviously when the president becomes assassinated, then the vice president becomes president. And this is eerily similar. Do you guys remember when Lincoln, he had the vice president Johnson? Do you remember this? Lincoln was a Republican, and he had a vice president as a Southern Democrat. Very different guy than Lincoln. Lincoln gets assassinated, Andrew Johnson becomes president, and Reconstruction completely changed. Do you remember this? Well, JFK is a Democrat. Lyndon B. Johnson is a Republican. And you're going to see how his take on certain things is going to be a little bit different. One of the things we're going to start with before we dip into LBJ's, Lyndon B. Johnson's foreign policy, we're going to talk about his domestic policy, which is called the Great Society. This is going to be compared to the Progressive era and the New Deal era. So in the assignment to come, you're going to be looking at the major Great Society programs, what he was trying to change in America during his presidency. So that's where we're going to stop today because it's the next assignment is on the Great Society. You guys are awesome and wonderful. Can't wait to continue this conversation with you more.